Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where you meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg.
Mind the gap between a train and the platform. Mind the gap between a train and the platform.
Welcome back on board. This is the 35th episode of the Shipping Podcast, and I am going to introduce you to a Blue Futurist. Maybe this is the time when the sound from the London Tube with Mind the Gap is most appropriate. I am introducing you to Kate D Adamson. She's an expert in how media trends, including digital business, connectivity, artificial intelligence, autonomy, and things like that, will affect the shipping industry. I know that some of you will probably choke when you listen to this episode. I am just thrilled. This is the things we need to think about. Kate is really worth listening to. So, without further ado, this is Kate D Adamson from the FutureNautics. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Certainly, I'm Kate Adamson, also known as KD Adamson, and I'm a futurist, and I specialise in the blue industry, so shipping and wider maritime industries.
So what's a futurist?
Futurist is basically somebody who looks at all the trends happening, be that technology, be it social, generational, and tries to put into context how that might change the world in the future. So there are what we call hard futures, which are things, in the next sort of 4 or 5 years that we're fairly confident about. And then there are softer futures, which are things that we think may happen and we can sort of give a bit of guidance over. There are some futurists who use very academic sort of methods to, foresight methods, etc. I'm not one of those. I just learn as much as I can and then I think about it and come up with what I think might happen.
I can relate to that. So what is your background?
My background is very varied. I worked for Inmarsat in the early 90s, so I know a bit about connectivity. But I bounced out of Inmarsat and I went into advertising. So I've worked in advertising and marketing, global branding strategy, and in through business strategy and business development. And then became a futurist about 5 years ago.
But when did you get in contact with shipping for the first time?
Well, I grew up in the Navy.
Oh, I see.
My father's a naval officer, retired naval officer in the Royal Navy, British Royal Navy. So there was always the sea and ships. And of course, working at Inmarsat, I went into maritime. Actually, I was in the commissioning department and worked in maritime. So I did a lot of work in maritime there. And then I married somebody who was a failed naval architect as well.
So you got it all. You got all the bugs then.
Yeah. I've just got no excuse.
Not to be in the shipping industry. So what do you do nowadays?
I wear a lot of different hats. So I founded FutureNautics a few years ago. And the purpose of FutureNautics was to try and close the technology gap, the technology knowledge gap that I perceived existed in the maritime and shipping industries.
So what is the FutureNautics?
FutureNautics is a range of resources, sort of primarily a magazine, quarterly magazine, which takes the technology trends that are relevant to maritime and tries to contextualise them. So that's been going a few years now, and we also do a range of senior level roundtables and white papers, etc., etc. So that's all focused in maritime and shipping. But with my other hat as a broader futurist, I also speak all over the world about what the future is going to look like in all sorts of respects, from health and education to politics and government, energy, etc., etc. So that's another hat, and I also write thrillers. So
you write thrillers?
I do.
Ah, interesting.
So the one that I wrote that's based around maritime is called Payload, and that's all about actually hacking of satellites and sending ships off course and various things like that. And a percentage of my royalties go to the Mission to Seafarers as well, so it's worth buying a copy. So you don't have to do an exhausting charity run. You can just buy a book and know that you've donated to the Mission to Seafarers.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's really good. So what do you see in the shipping? I mean, you've been around for a while then, and what changes have you seen?
I think what we're seeing now is the impact of digital disruption on the shipping industry. Shipping is becoming information enabled, and the lesson of all other industries is once an industry becomes information enabled, then, things are going to change radically. Obviously, we're in a very difficult situation right now today as we speak. The rates are terrible, but it's actually much broader than that. And my concern is that everybody's so focused on how they're going to pay everybody tomorrow that there are structural changes in in both the kind of technology that we're using and the global economy that is being driven by the technology is not really being appreciated. For example, things like the changes in manufacturing practices, 3D printing could well slash container volumes by 30%. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of the way that shipping is going to develop, shipping has always been reliant on having cargoes to ship about. And what's very important and very significant is that we assume shipping will grow in concert with global GDP the way it always has. And there's a decoupling going on there. It always used to be that we would expect shipping to grow at twice GDP. That's down at about parity now. And there's evidence that link's going to decouple. And one of the things I hear very often is, well, people will always need shipping to ship things around. And actually, when you look at the structural changes in how things are being manufactured, you look at collaborative consumption, you look at things like the circular economy and, the impact that will have on the number of materials that are being shipped, virgin materials. There is very strong evidence that not only will the types of cargoes that we're going to ship change, but actually the volume of those cargoes is going to change too.
Give them an example of that.
Well, for example, you look at these big container ships taking containers full of, little bits of manufactured stuff from the east to the west. Well, a lot of those things in future, you will probably just print locally. Those cargoes will disappear in the fullness of time. So that's stuff that's already manufactured. And when you look at raw materials, at the moment we have the take, make, throw away economy. We use virgin materials, we make things, and when we finish with them, we throw them away. The circular economy is focused on use cycles rather than life cycles. So in actual fact, there are opportunities here because manufacturers who are recycling products might well be sending products back the other way instead of east to west, actually west to east, for things to be remanufactured. So there are opportunities, for shippers to actually find out how their customers are going to change their models and be responsive to those. But in order to do that, you have to, accept that things are going to change radically. And at the moment, I'm not really seeing a broad acceptance of that.
Neither am I. But how do you explain that to people within the shipping industry?
Well, frankly, people within the shipping industry should understand that the shipping industry doesn't exist in a bubble. And all you ever hear is, there's nothing we can do. We're at the mercy of, the global economy. Well, this is the global economy that we're talking about. The global economy is already showing signs of these changes. We've got big demographic changes. Everyone's aging. Older people don't buy lots of consumer goods. And with the younger generations, their attitude to access over ownership, they don't want lots of new stuff they're going to throw away. They want personalized things. And we're developing, the methods to provide that. So the whole structure of the consumer economies that have been so far are probably going to change. So shipping really shouldn't need this explained to them because there are plenty of people, including, economists, who will give them chapter and verse. The problem is that shipping cannot break out of the cycle it's in, partly because what shipping should be doing is providing value to its end customer. We should be there to provide a service. But what's actually happening is people are speculating in ships. People who own ships do not buy ships so that they can provide the best service possible to their customers. They buy ships so that they can make money, and they make counter-cyclical investments in tonnage and hope that they can buy and sell at the right time. And that's why shipping is dysfunctional at the moment. Now, you can argue that lenders shouldn't give people money to buy ships when we already knew there was overcapacity. That's absolutely true. But there's no point blaming people. Somebody has to turn around and start forging a new model.
How do people look upon you when you say that to them? Are they shutting their ears or are they interested?
No, the people I tend to talk to tend to be fairly senior. And by and large, they're clever people. And when somebody sits down and lays it on the line for them, then, they take notice. But the problem is, as I say, you've got people firefighting day to day. Everybody's, dependent on the next quarter's results. If you're a chief executive, you are judged quarter by quarter. And it is a very, very challenging thing, for incumbent organisations to effectively disrupt themselves. And in fact, the next issue of FutureNautics, I'm going to be focusing on innovation and how we do that in the industry. You look at the things that Rolls-Royce are doing, that Wärtsilä are doing. They've just had this Marine Mastermind contest, trying to go out and find people that aren't connected with the maritime industry, that have got ideas that can be adapted and used in the maritime industry. There are all sorts of ways that you try and disrupt yourself, but it's extremely difficult. And the danger is for the big incumbent companies in the maritime and shipping industry that they are not quick enough to disrupt, and they will just be overtaken by guys with real digital expertise, which we lack.
It's so interesting because I have got one comment on that contest, and I tweeted to Wärtsilä that if they needed some female judges on that competition, I know a few.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair to Tero Hotnan and his guys, I think it was pretty much a leap of faith. I mean, I admire the guy for doing it at all.
I think it looked great.
Yeah, and it looked great. And, to connect up with Slush, which is, one of the biggest events in the world, connecting startups, technology startups and investors and VCs. I thought that was a really clever thing to do. And, no, there weren't any female judges, but then, these things take a little bit of time, and hopefully next year, that will be something that when they've done it once, I say next year, maybe they won't do it again, but if they do it again, maybe, that's something that they can address. But the other thing that's important about Slush this year was it wasn't just Tero and his guys there. There was Patrick Berglund from Zanetta on the stage as well. They've been picked as one of the Nordic, superstar startups, even though they're a few years old now. And of course, Zanetta are the people who are disrupting the container industry. They're the guys who I think we picked up about 3 years ago, pointed to, what they were doing with their crowdsource freight rate benchmarking site. And their growth has been absolutely phenomenal. So this year, that Slush festival, which I doubt has seen much of the maritime industry in the past, had two very important maritime companies on the stage. I think that is progress.
I agree. Since I've started this podcast, I get sometimes approached by people who are pitching things to me. And they say, I've been trying to pitch this into the shipping industry, but no one listens. So I went out and I did a small interview with people I know, and I asked, how do we work with innovation within the maritime industry? And it was so interesting. They didn't even understand the question, because all the answers I got was, we have innovation in our technical department. And that is not the answer I was looking for.
No, well, Henry Ford said, about the car, he said, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And unfortunately, what the maritime industry is very, very good at is renovation. So what do I do with this product to make it version 6.3 or version 6.4? What features and functionality do I add to this? That is not innovation. Now, in the defense of the maritime industry, that is partly because so much of the stuff that suppliers create has been created because of an IMO mandate. So ECDIS is a prime example. If a ship operator had actually spec'd ECDIS, then it probably wouldn't have looked anything like most of them that are out there. But the thing is, when you have things that the ship operator has got to buy, you get an awful lot of people flooding in and creating that product. So what happens usually in industries is that suppliers listen to their customers and get very close to their customers to work out what their needs are and to solve their problems. And the maritime supply industry hasn't really been doing that. The maritime supply industry has been ensuring that their customers comply with mandates and legislation rather than actually identifying what those customers need to be more competitive. And that has created a very adversarial relationship in the shipping and maritime industry between suppliers. And, it isn't just about products. True innovation, you need to innovate around your business models. And this is where digital really comes in, because delivery of services, the type of services that people need, even the kind of ecosystems created around product can be different now. And for an example, I've just been talking to Rolls-Royce about their power by the hour model, which is where instead of, your engine, you need it serviced or it breaks down, you pay for somebody to come and maintain it. You pay a fixed fee for that maintenance contract. So what happens there is you change the alignment of expectation and objective for the customer and the supplier. So in the old days, if the engine broke down, well, it was no problem for Rolls-Royce. It was quite good, actually, because they made a bit more money. And whereas now what you have is it's in Rolls-Royce's interest for that engine to be as reliable as possible, in the same way that it's in the ship operator's interest. And what I see that developing into is probably an asset-based power by the hour. So you won't just have a maintenance contract. You will probably end up having an engine that you pay literally power by the hour rather than just the maintenance contract. And of course, when you have that relationship, you bed the supplier and the customer much, much closer together. It's a much more deeply embedded relationship. It's a much longer term relationship. And you're sharing data and you're understanding the way your product operates. You can actually then iterate that product faster because you're getting feedback from the customer. And if that's something like an engine, that ecosystem then can grow. You could have a regulator in that ecosystem that can see, the engine's being operated properly, the emissions, all these other things. So I think what we're going to see more of is these growing, changing ecosystems around products and services. And frankly, it's what we need, because at the moment you have ship operators, ship managers who need new technologies. They need new platforms and new ways of working. And you've got suppliers who could produce them, but they don't understand the customers properly. And you need to collaborate. We need much more collaboration in shipping and maritime. We need to end this adversarial divide and actually bring people together, because that's the only way that the shipping industry is really going to thrive. Here endeth the lesson.
I always agree with my guests. I mean, that's my biggest problem. I agree with my guests too much. I usually preach about that everything that happens on shore will also happen at sea, sooner or later. So we could just turn around and see what happens on land. And I have one example about SKF, the bull bearing company that is in Gothenburg, where I live. And nowadays it's not only selling bull bearings, it's selling the ecosystem with the bull bearing. So if that is in a big machine, a Caterpillar or whatever, they can see on beforehand when that bull bearing is going to be soon breaking down or need to be changed before it breaks down. So they deliver the bull bearing with an iPad or something like that. And you can follow and see what happens with... So it's not only the product, they are delivering what you say, a product with an ecosystem.
It's about adding value as well, because one of the real concerns that I have as we go forward is that we are going to, everything's going to involve more digital operation. And the industry is beginning to understand the benefits of that. But there are also downsides to digital operation that have to be managed. For example, things like, cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And this is something that I've been closely involved in for, a year or 18 months now. And it is an issue for the maritime industry, because you will find in all other industries, domestic, national, government, schemes, etc., that will probably force certain amounts of cyber compliance or whatever. But in the maritime industry, we really need IMO to do that. The whole benefit of IMO has always been that there's a law that we adhere to that means we can go into any port in the world. And we are already seeing that the United States is beginning to draw up cyber hygiene guidelines, and those criteria, if we don't meet those criteria, we're not going to be able to get alongside in the States. And that will just be one flag state. Others will follow. And this really highlights one of the struggles that I think we're going to have, a real big problem going forward. And that is that as technology accelerates, we're talking about exponentially growing technology here, the bureaucracies that regulate it are not growing in parallel. And you could almost say, really, I describe it as the bureaucratic singularity, the point at which bureaucracy loses its ability to regulate. And actually looking at the situation with cybersecurity in the maritime industry now, you could almost say that we're at the inflection point, really. IMO should be the people now who are stepping up and creating industry-wide guidelines and laws for this. but actually it can't, because it simply isn't nimble enough and agile enough and fast enough to do it. The technology is developing faster than IMO can actually regulate. And so what we're going to see is probably flag states bringing in their own rules and regulations. And actually talking about these ownership ecosystems, this is where potentially we could see regulation coming into that ecosystem. If you have manufacturers, you have suppliers, you have ship operators, you have lenders, insurers, and you have transparency into that ownership ecosystem. I think that is a potential way forward for how we can regulate the industry, because certainly not just in maritime, the bureaucratic singularity isn't just happening in maritime, it's happening everywhere. But we have a particular issue because we operate globally. And as soon as that starts breaking down, that's going to have a massive impact on the ability of our industry to trade globally. The one thing that IMO, you can say we like about IMO, but the one thing that it has given us all is that ability to go anywhere in the world and know that as long as we comply with those regulations, then we'll be okay by and large. And as that starts to break down, cybersecurity is an example, but that's just the first thing. As I say, I think we're reaching the inflection point now, and that has massive consequences for us as an industry. And how we meet that challenge is going to be defining, because we need this technology. We need this technology in order to integrate with our customers, with the cargo owners, and the charterers. They want us to upskill digitally. We have to do it. And if IMO can't provide the legislation that we need to do that, then we're going to have to find ways as an industry to do it ourselves.
Who's going to lead that?
As I say, I think what you will find is it will be suppliers and ship operators, lenders, insurers that will come together to regulate these things. For example, when you talk about cybersecurity, I'm trying to set up a working group at the moment to look at how you could develop a centre of excellence in the maritime industry for maritime and shipping, which would provide threat intelligence and reporting, which would provide insurance, because at the moment an awful lot of ship operators have no idea that thanks to cyber exclusion clauses, any cyber attack renders their insurance completely useless. And there are an awful lot of lenders that don't realise that the tonnage they're invested in is not covered. So what I'm trying to say is you've got a lot of stakeholders here that could come together to actually do the same job that regulation does at the moment. And using digital platforms and transparency, you could forge a new kind of ecosystem which effectively regulated itself, because all the stakeholders need everybody pointing in the same direction. Everybody, for example, cybersecurity is not a competitive advantage. We need everybody to be cyber secure, because if one person isn't, then we're all vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Do we need other skills? Do we need to change the education within the maritime industry?
Education needs to change per se. So yes, it does include the maritime industry, but you can look at, there's a variety of startups you can look at that are looking at, gamifying education. There have been a variety of studies that show quite clearly that if you introduce very young children to gamified apps for maths and English, etc., they're 6 months, 12 months, 18 months ahead of other children that have not been introduced to learning in that way. So I don't think there's any question that digital ways of learning are going to become more important, and that will happen in shipping as well. But it's actually more about the mindset towards learning. At the moment, we say we want to train people and we want to grab them into the industry and keep them for as long as we possibly can. And those kind of ideas, I don't think are going to last very much longer. Careers are going to be much more fluid. You and I were talking earlier, Lena, about the way that the younger generations learn. They just go online and they find videos and tutorials and they teach themselves. And that kind of attitude to learning is something we need to encourage, but also it's already there. This digital native generation, if they don't understand something, they don't think, I can't do that because I'm not qualified. They think, I don't know how to do that today, but Mr. Google will help me. Mr. YouTube will help me to understand how to do that. And that changes a lot of and again, we're talking about regulation. If somebody is certified to do something, you look at most of the training courses in the maritime industry and the pass mark is probably 60, 70%. So that means that you can have completely failed to grasp a third of what you've been taught, Lena's laughing, okay, for the purposes of the microphone. Lena's laughing here. You could fail to understand a third of what you've been taught and you will have your ticket and you are considered to be fine to do that job. If you look at something like gamification, you play a game, you don't get to the next level until you've actually got 100% on the level you're already on. So my argument is that by introducing that kind of gamification attitude and saying, no, everybody learns at their own speed, but you make sure they have actually learnt it before they move up to the next level. If you raised the capability of our seafarers from that 60% to 95%, what difference would that make to the industry overnight? If you raised the pass mark, on all of those courses to 95%, what kind of impact would that have on the industry? Mm-hmm. And as I say, I don't necessarily say you can do it by making them take, the same courses they're taking now again and again. But if you change the method of learning to actually encourage that 95, 100% of understanding, then I think you would change things massively. So that's just one example.
Have you seen anyone trying to change the methods of learning within our industry?
Not within our industry at the moment. I was involved. I've used the term gamification, and that runs across training. It runs across an awful lot of things. I was involved in the Crew Connect Global Conference down in Manila at the end of last year, and they have a seafarer task force, and they wanted to come up with something for these bunch of cadets that they gave them a challenge in the morning and they had to deliver something by the afternoon. And something that has been a pet project of mine, thoughts of mine for about a year or so now, is a serious game for shipping. And I guess you understand what I mean by serious game, but maybe people listening to this don't. A serious game is something like, for example, Siemens Plantville, or anything that uses gamification methods to actually engage people, but sort of teach them things, learn things at the same time.
They can only ask their children. Everyone who's listening to this can just ask their children.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. Go and ask your children about gamification. So these cadets, other people's children in Manila, these cadets, they were absolutely excited about this. So, my suggestion was, why don't we get a game developer in and see if we could get these cadets to come up during that day with a few ideas for what a serious game for shipping could look like. And they did exactly that. And with the help of this game developer, they came up with 2 or 3 different outlines, and they were absolutely fantastic. And the key thing was that these cadets had smiles on their faces like you wouldn't believe. They really thoroughly enjoyed it. And every one of them said, yeah, this is great. This is how you engage people. So in terms of training gamification, no, I haven't seen it yet. Although there's a guy who works for Videotel, and he used to lecture in gamification, and he's very switched on. Not I've seen it coming out in their products yet, but I'm sure it will. But in terms of gamification generally, and a serious game for the industry, it was such a success in Manila, what they did, that I'm now following up with that games developer and a couple of other interested parties. And I'm hoping that I can try and pull together a little bit of funding to get shipping's first serious game, because that is how you're going to engage the digital native generation. And God bless IMO going out with their little picture books and inviting people into IMO and telling them all about shipping. That's lovely. But these are digital natives, and you've got to engage them in the way they understand, and that's digitally.
It's interesting because I usually put the same 5 questions to every guest. I don't know if you have listened to my podcast, but people do answer from their own standpoint. So I get different answers every time. I don't even have to put the questions to you. You already know what I want to know.
So I've listened to all your podcasts.
No, I don't think so. No, but what about the unmanned ships? You have been talking
unmanned
about
ships.
it.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting one, unmanned ships, because the word unmanned is very emotive and everybody jumps to one side or the other. They're a good thing, they're a bad thing. The bottom line with unmanned ships is you're talking about autonomy. The trend is autonomy, and that's happening in all modes of transport, and it will. So are we going to have autonomous ships? And I choose my words carefully. Are we going to have autonomous ships in the maritime industry? Yes, we will. I'm pretty confident about that. That's a hard future. I'm quite confident about. Will we have unmanned ships? Probably. But there will be certain sectors that will probably never go unmanned. Tankers, for example. I think that will be one of the very last to go unmanned. Having said that, things like containers, yeah, probably. If you look at the developments towards autonomy, you've already got the kind of connectivity in place now that allows you to transfer data backwards and forwards. And a lot of people focus on connectivity saying, well, that will be the stumbling block for, unmanned vessels because the connectivity will never be reliable enough. And Rolls-Royce don't help by talking about remote control. And I have had this out with Oscar Levander at Rolls-Royce, because actually remote control is not autonomy. Remote control is effectively not having somebody on the bridge controlling it, but somebody ashore controlling it. Autonomy is something different. Autonomy is actually creating an intelligent vessel that, using the data from its sensors and an algorithm that it can work out what all that means, can then decide for itself what it needs to do. So there needs to be a differentiation here in the discussion between a ship which is remote controlled, which you can virtually do now, really. I mean, you look at the engine manufacturers, and the remote support that they're doing on engines, you can virtually do that now. But autonomy is something different. A ship that actually goes off by itself and controls itself. But a ship that goes off and is intelligent and controls itself doesn't mean it doesn't have to have people on it, which is why I say, we will have autonomous ships with people on them. It's very, very important for the industry to understand the opportunity here, because when people say we won't have unmanned ships, they say because there's no business case for it. The business case may not come from shipping, but the business case may come from the ship as part of the Internet of Everything. Tightly integrated logistics chains. What they want is to integrate shipping in what I'm describing as a blue logistics channel. And actually the ability for your ship to seamlessly integrate with these new Industry 4.0. Davos at the World Economic Forum, they're talking about Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 is about cyber physical systems, digital manufacturing, digital logistics change, supply chains. And if you want shipping to participate in that, you need your ship to become a cyber physical system, which is effectively an autonomous component in that system. That's where the value will come. And that's why in shipping, we haven't got why we would need unmanned ships, because we're so myopically focused on how it would affect our day-to-day profit and loss. We haven't seen the bigger picture of where shipping is going and where our customers are going and how we can add value. Ship efficiency has always been about, optimization and reducing cost. Autonomy, unmanned, that is about adding value and moving ourselves up the value chain.
I get so many ideas in my head when you speak. And you definitely need to listen to the podcast with Professor Watson, which is a suitable name. He's going to do the connectivity for shipping. He's going to solve that.
In what way?
To build a system and to exchange information.
See, the interesting thing is that, again, we all talk about connectivity. We've got these new high-throughput satellites coming online, Inmarsat and Global Express, and the Intelsat Epic satellite that just went up successfully the other week. But actually, when it comes to autonomy, that connectivity is not really essential, because the whole point of autonomy is that you use edge computing. You push that processing to the component level. The falling cost of microprocessors means that the component now can actually censor itself. It can decide what it needs to do, and it can take that action. So you won't have data coming from the ship to shore and somebody deciding what the ship should do and it going back again. Actually, that will all take place at the edge of the network. This is the Internet of Everything. And you talk to IBM, they're already outlining how these distributed networks are going to operate. And they're saying what you're giving rise to is, points of value creation in each of those components. They're now talking about an economy of things that you can have value out of. We're likely to see, at the moment we've got the communications internet, we're likely to see the energy internet developing. And we will probably see, something like the Internet of Everything. There'll be another value creation that happens there on that industrial level as well. Exactly how it's going to pan out, and you can't be sure, but the trend is there.
Will that mean that there will be more women in shipping in the future?
Well, the way to get more women in shipping is not to keep going on about sending them to sea. The problem with women in shipping is that the only people that shipping companies want to recruit are people who have a background at sea. And actually, that's a problem in itself, because that means we don't have the cognitive diversity that we need in maritime. Because as dear old Kuba Szymanski will tell you, unless you've got 35 years behind the mast, we don't want to talk to you. And that's wrong. And that's partly why you have people telling you that innovation is handled by their R&D department, because they simply cannot raise their eyes from the shipping industry and understand how it slots into the rest of the world. And for a lot of industries, gender diversity is a path to cognitive diversity. That's really what you're finding. You have a woman on the board because they bring a different perspective. But the problem is in shipping that a lot of the women who are in shipping have come via, such male-dominated channels that they think the same way the men do. And I'm sorry if that's difficult for some people to hear, but it is true. We don't just need women. We actually need people who think differently. And that means people who come from outside the maritime industry. And if they are women, all the better. I'm a woman, you may have gathered, but I am not somebody who bangs on about gender diversity because I think you just need women for the sake of women. You actually need people who think differently. And it isn't good enough to say, I have a woman on my board. If it's a woman who's been in maritime their whole lives and doesn't see anything wrong, with the kind of attitudes to women that persist. Because, I spend all my time, hopefully, pointing out that women need to be taken seriously, that women are capable of talking about technology and business and strategy. But that's what I do every day of my life. And the only way you can do that kind of thing is by example. And every woman in maritime needs to do the same thing. It's not enough to say there aren't enough women. You have to stand up and be counted and say, here I am. I'm a woman in maritime and look what I'm doing. And if people don't like you for it, and they probably won't, you have to not care.
I agree. I know that feeling. And I think we have something to bring to the table. All of us.
No, absolutely. As I say, it is really important to have women involved in organisations. But we're a compliance-driven industry, and I don't think it's right that people want to have a woman on the board to tick a box. It's a culture, that you want to have a woman on the board because you think it's important to have a woman on the board, not because you feel that you ought to. And interestingly, look at the research. Companies who do have senior women on the board are something like 16 to 20% more profitable. And actually, the research shows that the companies that don't have women at board level, they're not only less profitable, they're actually lagging. They're actually lagging other companies in those industries. So there's no doubt that there's something there. And if it adds something to the bottom line, then fantastic. But what does frustrate me is that you have groups of women saying we've got to get more women in whichever industry you're talking about. The truth is that that's not going to happen until you persuade the men that it's important, because it is the men who need to take up this cause. And I can't remember who it is. It's some international organisation. They've created a he for she campaign. And that is totally based around this idea that you find senior influential men and you make them stand up and say, I want women in my organisation. I want to sponsor women. I want to find promising women and create a pipeline for them in this organisation.
Yeah, I keep telling women I know within the shipping group that we need to find the men who wants to change things together with us, and let's do it and leave the other ones behind.
A lot of these men that you talk to, they've got clever wives, they've got clever daughters. It's not that they don't get the fact that women can contribute. It's just they haven't been given a mechanism to actually make that happen. And if you look at other chief executives in other industries who have forced things through, then they've had to set up some really quite careful procedures, within organizations to ensure that these pipelines continue to deliver women at senior levels. And all this about, well, it's because you want to go and have children. It's very often, it's nothing to do with that at all.
No.
That is a misnomer. And of course, again, if we insist on going on about sending women to sea, the way to get more women in shipping is to send them to sea, by definition, you're going to struggle with that, because what person, never mind man or woman, what person in the younger generation is going to say, yes, I'd like to go away for 6 or 7 months? It's not a female thing. It's a generational thing. They don't want to be separated from friends and family and very often connectivity. So that is a losing battle. And we need to switch the focus to saying we want to find data scientists. We want to find maths graduates. We want to find software developers. And we need them anyway. Wouldn't it be nice if they were women as well? We need good managers. We need people that bring techno-economic thinking into boardrooms. And frankly, we just need people who don't fit in. And in a lot of cases, that's often my job, is to stand up somewhere and say, I don't fit in, so I'm going to say this and I'm going to make you think, because that's what you need. Somebody who refuses to fit in and forces people to re-evaluate all the assumptions that they've got. Like, for example, shipping is going to grow because it'll grow alongside GDP. Well, wake up, smell the coffee. It might not. And those kind of reassessments, the fundamentals of the industry that you work in are changing. They're extremely difficult for any senior manager, any chief executive, any board to actually stand up and say, yeah, we really do need to have a what we call in screenwriting a page one rewrite.
Yeah, and I met with someone the other day, and I am senior in a way, and they were talking about people in their leadership group, and I know them, of course, and I have a different perspective of them than they have, the people who are working for them nowadays. And we're talking about change. And of course, the people now in my age that have been working for 25 years in the industry and finally have reached the management level, they don't want to change the management level thing of doing things because they've been waiting to get there for the last 25 years. When they finally reach that level, finally they reach their dreams. So they want to change that.
And again, the reason that the shipping industry senior management is mostly white, middle-aged and late middle-aged and middle class is because they were promoted by similarly white, late middle-aged, middle class people ahead of them. We tend to pick people like us.
Yeah.
That's just a human trait. And to change that is very challenging. We're not saying that this is easy. It's not easy. But as I've said to many senior guys, you cannot leave this in the inbox for your successor. If you don't grab hold of some of these issues now, like disruption, diversity, all of these things that people are saying, I've got a bulker that's earning me $2,500, dollars a day. I don't have time for diversity. Well, maybe you don't. But if you want to be around in 10 years' time, you've got to find some way to address these issues while keeping your head above water. And no one's saying it's easy. But then if it was easy, everyone would do it.
Traditionally, it has also been okay for women to work with HR, communication and insurance. It's sort of the soft values.
Marketing as well.
Marketing as well, yeah.
PR.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the kind of non-threatening, fanciful kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I went to a meeting not that long ago and somebody just assumed I was the PR girl. Which is fine, some PR can be challenging and, people who are very good at it are very good at it. But the problem is that it's exactly the same in shipping with this idea that there's good, valuable data, for example, which is engineering data, things that come from engines and things like that. And then there's this data mining, data scientists, and that's all fluffy. And it's quite interesting because it's exactly the same attitude that you get with women. There are certain things that are important. There are certain things that are fluffy. And where, the big data wave is changing this is that actually to get real value out of big data, you need to bring those data sets together. So it's a bit of, it's a bit allegorical, it's exactly the same. The kind of fluffy skills that women are supposed to be better at, which I think is just rubbish. But if you take that as an attitude, you say, okay, maybe women are better at some of these softer skills. And then you've got the hard, tough mathematical stuff. Actually, the future is creative problem solvers with an aptitude for technology, really, and maths and logic. And you need both of these sides to make that happen. Human-machine interaction is going to be one of the great challenges as we go forward. You can see what's happening in aviation. Everything's been machine-centered, and actually now we understand that you need more human-centered automation. And that's another way of saying you need the yin and the yang, the male and the female. You need these things to come together. Collaboration, integration, interfaces. Now, this is where the great challenge is coming. And I must just say, we do have an issue in that maritime and shipping need more technology expertise. And if there's one thing that Silicon Valley and shipping have in common is that there are virtually bugger all women in either of them. So we have a bigger challenge because we don't have any women as it is. And the kind of skills we're going to be recruiting in, there aren't many women with them. So we've got a real uphill battle in shipping to try and get that cognitive diversity, gender diversity.
How do we get shipping more visible?
Yeah, I wrote about this last year, and there seems to be this attitude that what shipping needs is better PR and better marketing. And as I said on the stage in Manila, shipping doesn't need that. Shipping doesn't need better PR. It just needs to get better. Because what drives interest and what drives engagement is transparency. Shipping doesn't do transparency. It plays its cards close to its chest because it doesn't really want anybody knowing what it's doing. It's been quite comfortable, thank you very much, not letting anybody know what's going on. Now, it comes back to this collaboration thing, because as we move forward, that kind of attitude, it doesn't play nicely with the digital landscape. We have at the moment a very opaque, volatile industry. And what you find is digital disruptors just come in and carve their way through it. They create transparency, they create platforms, they drive efficiencies, they disintermediate, middlemen. I mean, brokers, you just have to wonder where they're going to be in a few years' time when you look at, what Zanetta's doing. And, look at platforms like ShipServe bringing buyers and sellers together. And now their algorithms are actually saying, well, if you need this, then this is the person who's probably most likely to supply it in the way that you want it supplied to you. These are sophisticated algorithms you're seeing coming into shipping. So transparency is actually what we need. And you're not going to drive that via PR, because what PR really does is try and take a story and a line and spin it out to everybody. And traditional PR is based on, well, as long as we can get these influential people to write about us, then we'll be okay. So you find an awful lot of people in maritime who think that as long as you can get a really nice article in Lloyd's List, then you've done really well. Well, actually, the truth of it is that the news stream is now every single person with a mobile phone, every single person with an internet connection, a camera, that is where news is coming from. And this scares ship operators rigid. The idea that their crew and anybody can be uploading anything and telling stories. But the truth of it is that you cannot fight this. What you have to do is take advantage of it. And I actually had a ship operator talk to me in Manila, and he said, we had this guy and there was a problem. He had a problem with the master, and instead of coming to us, he put something on social media, and it was an absolute nightmare, whatever, and we said, why didn't you come to us? And he said, well, because the master said that I had to go through him first and I couldn't. So what it exposed, and I had a chat with this guy, and I said to him, well, actually, this has saved you an awful lot of hassle, because that guy that you sacked, how long could he have worked in your company without you finding out that actually he wasn't the kind of person you probably wanted as crew on your vessel? But more than that, what he pointed out to the company was that a grievance procedure, which has to go through the master, who may be the person who is the subject of the grievance procedure and therefore won't let it go any further, is not a process that's fit for purpose. So even though it's felt like a bit of a disaster for them at the time, I won't go into the details of it, obviously, but it felt like a bit of a disaster at the time that had all been caused by this transparency in social media, etc. But they learnt an awful lot, and they changed things because of that. I'm not saying that social media is a wonderful panacea, because it's not. Social media is just people, and you get good people and you get bad people. But actually, the transparency that it can deliver is what the generation that we need to engage want. And if we honestly feel that we have got an industry that is worth shouting about, then we can't be scared of the transparency that social media will bring. And if it does point out things that are wrong, we need to put them right, which is why I say we don't need better PR. We don't need better marketing. We need to get better. Because if we know we've got issues with our emissions or with the way some crew are treated or, with all sorts of things, we need to work as an industry to make them better. And there's no point in getting a highly paid PR agency to try and, make shipping more visible. Shipping becomes transparent. Shipping will become more visible.
It means that they should do it the other way around. They should tell everyone that could be on social media to talk about the shipping industry in social media, instead of saying you're not allowed.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, if the industry is sufficiently scared of what their people will say on social media, then they should be scared about those people working for them. I mean, somebody gave me a great analogy a while ago, and they said, somebody who works for you, and they said, I'm going to go out and meet this client. I'm going to go and have lunch. Do you bug them? Do you send somebody from PR to sit next to them to make sure that they don't say anything indiscreet during their business lunch? Of course you don't. You trust that person, that what they said, that they represent the company, and that you trust them to represent the company properly. And this is really just an extension of that. So if you really don't trust the people who work for you, well, that's fine. Now, there is a line between people who maybe use bad language or, there are some tactical parts about this, but that's just training. It's exactly the same. I went out for lunch with somebody and I said, do you want a glass of wine? And they said, oh, well, if you're having one, we're allowed to, if a client's having one, then, we'll have one too, kind of thing. So, you can have procedures and policies about how people interact on social media in exactly the same way that you can have them about that, how they interact physically with people. That isn't really the stumbling block. The stumbling block is that we really are worried about what our people are going to say on social media. And what that tells us is, as I say, there's no point in trying to make it look better. You've got to make it better.
You're so wise.
Well, thank you for saying that. I don't know about that.
Did you ever have a role model?
Do you know, I don't think I did. I'm a child of Thatcher. I was 9 years old when Margaret Thatcher was elected. So I'm not saying on a political level, but I do remember staying up all night to watch the election of the first female Prime Minister of the UK. And my mother saying to me, this is historic. We think she's going to get in. You need to stay up. So I was 9 years old and I stayed up and I watched that. And here we are 30 odd years later. And, we still haven't had another female Prime Minister. So I think for me and a lot of women of my generation who are British, whether we agreed with her politics or not, I think she probably was a role model, because what she demonstrated was that you could climb to the very heights of government as a woman in times when you still couldn't get a mortgage on your own sometimes, in the late 70s as a woman, certainly in England. So I guess in terms of influences, maybe not as a role model per se, but in terms of influence, seeing Margaret Thatcher standing at the dispatch box in Westminster and, having the best of the other men there, I think that was probably formative.
Mm. Who do you think I should interview the next time in my podcast?
I think you should go and talk to Christopher Rex. Christopher Rex is the head of research at Danish Ship Finance. And I just made him my FutureNaut for the next issue. I have one interview every issue, a big interview with somebody that I think is really talking some interesting stuff. Christopher puts out the shipping market review twice a year. And if you want more about the decoupling of shipping growth from GDP and Industry 4.0, new business models, Christopher's a guy to talk to, and he's a very good chap, very nice chap too. I recommend you go forthwith to Copenhagen and interview.
I will. I am planning to go there. I've got only one question left. You have put out the question yourself. How many futurists does it take to change an industry? What is the answer to that now?
Banana. No. It's a joke. How many surrealists does it take to change a light bulb? Banana. So I'm just borrowing that. No, it doesn't take futurists to change an industry. It takes mindsets, and they can come from outside or inside an industry. My job, and I really love it, is to think all the time. I have the luxury of spending a lot of my time thinking. And if what I can do is to encourage other people to think, because in this world that we live in, it's 24/7. And if you've got a big job in a big shipping company or a small shipping company or a maritime supplier or a regulator or anywhere, you are expected to perform. It's always about what you deliver the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, hour, day. And stopping and thinking about things that could affect you that you probably don't encounter day to day is extremely valuable. So how many futurists does it take to change an industry? I think I could change the maritime industry if I managed to get the attention of enough senior people and gave them enough new things to think about. So I don't think it's about me. It's about changing the way that people approach the way they think about what they're doing day to day. And that's really all any futurist does, because we don't know what's going to happen. but it's about understanding as much as you possibly can. And we have got access to so much information now. We've got to bear in mind that the sources of information open to us free now. You can know so much. And actually, if you really want to succeed, it's about gathering as much information as you possibly can and then thinking about it. If we thought more, we'd be more successful.
That is why I invited you to the Shipping Podcast. Now, I hope you have got some people's attention to start to think about things. I myself can relate to that because now I've got some more time to think, and I do the same thing that you do. I think about what is happening and how can that influence our industry. I think it's so interesting.
It is, and the things that we need in companies and shipping going forward, there's a couple of things: vision and agility. Yeah. If you can combine vision and agility, then you've got a chance. But don't be fooled. People won't survive the next 5 or 6 years. There will be companies that simply just can't cope with the pace of change. And that's sad. But then that's evolution. Some would call it digital Darwinism. But that, unfortunately, is just the way it goes. But the ones that come out the other side, my goodness me, the opportunities I see are huge. I'm an optimist.
Thank you for your time, Kate. Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Can I take you for dinner?
Yes, of course you can. Thank you. I really enjoyed this interview with Kate. It's very refreshing, and I hope many of you take the time to comment or elaborate further, either on iTunes or on the website shippingpodcast.com or through the social medias, Twitter or Facebook. I think we need to discuss this. Is she right, or do you think she's wrong? Is this the way we are heading, or do you have anything further to add? So take the opportunity and join the debate. In the last episode, I told you that the Shipping Podcast is downloaded in 110 countries. I would like to thank you all. Did I tell you about the top 10 countries? It's Sweden, of course, since I am nagging on everyone I meet that they must listen to the Shipping Podcast. Number 2, United Kingdom. Number 3, the United States. And number 4, Norway. Those are the top 4. But, continuing on, it's Spain, Germany, Netherlands, China, Denmark, Finland, Canada, Philippines, Australia, Singapore, France, India, Brazil, Greece, Italy, and the United Arab Emirates. So that was actually the top 20. The reason for me telling you this is that I want you to tell everyone that they need to listen to the Shipping Podcast. And I want the advertisers to understand that this is not something that we do in Gothenburg. This is spread around the world. We got listeners in Greenland, Korea, Tanzania, Cayman Island, everywhere. So join the companies I'm negotiating with right now to be the ones supporting this channel of shipping, which is like no one else. Thank you for listening. Until the next time, over and out.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform. Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a Shipping Podcast where the maritime professionals are talking about their everyday job.